going to have a go at using this particular picture here, and I'm going to stretch it that way and change it totally. I don't have the copyrights to use that picture to copy it straight off, so we're just going to base our paintings upon this. To show Hemma, who's asked me across to her home, we're going to demonstrate a few ways of painting water and waves, and that one is going to be, this one's going to be a watercolour. And we're going to concentrate on this deep blue sky we're going to have here, the different blues going across, and how to paint this wave, enlarge this wave here onto the beach. So we'll be using some wet into wet techniques, but next to wet techniques, playing one colour against another, and then finally the wet next to the dry to get sharp edges. I'm not going to bother drawing it out, I'm just going to go straight for it, just to have fun. A very basic set of watercolours which will do us today, and we'll see what we can do. So we've got a horizon line along here. We want that wave to be a little bit higher, so I'm going to have the horizon line just below halfway. It's unwise to have things always straight on halfways exactly, because they look a bit too obvious. The thirds rule is quite good, to have 2/3 or 1/3, like the golden rule, the golden mean. So I'm going to actually start with the sky and work my way downwards. We want to leave nice white fluffy clouds here, and to do that I'm going to paint in the very deep blue first of all. I'm going to make myself some very, very deep blue into the ultramarine, and paint it very, very strongly at first. Drop some darker into it in a moment. Keep it nice and loose. So we'll come in with that paint. Watercolour always goes so it's slightly lighter than when we paint it on. So I'm going to leave a little bit of a vignette at the top. I'm not going to paint right the way to the top. We'll just keep it fairly loose for the moment. Coming down into the clouds here, a little bit of very dark blue now, a little bit of, I think it's Prussian. The colours I'm using are not mine, so they didn't actually, being cheaper watercolours, they didn't actually have the colours marked on them. I'm having to guess as to what these are for this demonstration, but quite fun nonetheless. So we've got this very deep blue coming down from the top there, and then we'll start to work that around the cloud effects that we want, coming right down into here. Taking that blue again, coming down with it. Starting to leave some cloud effects already. Today here. Can't find any cerulean blue in watercolour, so I'm going to have to use some acrylic for this. Which is not ideal because it'll be opaque, but we'll try and manage. So I'm going to bring this cerulean blue now into the edges of this cloud. We do need these different colours, and you should always use artist watercolour quality in your paintings. Try not to get away with using the cheaper ones if you can help it. Right, and a great big fluffy cloud coming down there, around here into there, and this is where I'm going to start using clean water to get my softer edges. So if I now come and I want a softer edge here, and just let that water do the work for me, let the clouds come on down into here, look, by letting them mix with that water, so it's hard edged in some places and softer edge in others. And we'll let that dry off a bit before I put some more hard edges back in again. And little white clouds coming down here through, right the way down to the horizon line there. And yet again at that horizon line, I want to get a fairly sharp edge in a minute, but I'm going to have to come in with my, I'm still using the acrylic at the moment, I'm going to have to come back in with my acrylic paint and put a line across there. Let the watercolour, this is controlled action, look at that beautiful effect we have there of the paint running one into another, the wet into the wet. And as this is starting to dry, I can now drop in more colour, make it a little bit stronger around some of these smaller clouds. A little bit of the darker blue here and there, just to pick out the underneath of these clouds and the effects we've got. So the dark comes in around. We let the water do the work, the accident do the work underneath this cloud coming up here. Underneath that cloud, and there's a little bit of pink coming into there, so I'll take a tad of the, looks like cobalt violet here, and just bring that into there, underneath that, because we've got reflected light from the warmth underneath, so a little bit of warmth into the clouds there to give this almost Caribbean blue look. We've really got to go for these strong colours. Soften that down at the edges. Carry on down here into this blue, still working at the moment. The wet into the wet. All the way down to the wave, which is going to start about here. And you notice I'm just starting to do a little bit of dry brushwork, just dragging the brush across there to start to get the feeling of the wave. Now this wave, I want to drop some more darker blues into here in a minute. While this is still wet, I need to just flick in the idea of some ripples and shoals underneath the water here, and those will spread out. So a little darker at the edge there. And these will spread out, and the wetter the paint is, the more that they will spread. So this is timing. We have to understand watercolour and practice with it to know how wet the paint can be, how much we are allowed to play with. That must be darker down there. To play with letting this colour in before it just completely coats in. So we have to let this dry for a bit now before I want stronger colours. Carrying on down into here, I want to come to a very light colour, and we paint our light colours a light green. We paint our light colours first in watercolour always. Take a little bit of lemon yellow, the tiniest touch of white in a minute, and we'll paint the lower edge of the wave as it curls over. So here's the lower edge of the wave going in. And a little bit more on the curl of the wave there. Let that dry just a little bit. We don't want everything spreading into that yet. Now we've got another colour coming down there, which will be the turquoise again. So we'll paint that next to it, and you'll notice that the paint is softly blending one into another, because we're painting wet next to wet now, so that one colour comes slightly into another. And to get the feeling of that wave, I'm going to drag these colours through in just a moment. Now we come to a slightly stronger cerulean. And I've got to start leaving the white for the foam as it comes over as well. I'm going to show two ways of doing this. We could have used masking fluid. I'm leaving the white now directly. Equally, I could be putting in some white paint afterwards, and I'm going to show a little bit of that, or even a touch of pastel. So there are several ways of doing this. I've got the dark coming over there, and you see now I'm just starting to drag over these colours to give the feeling of the wave one into another. So that's coming over into that wave with little brush strokes which will spread out gently to give the feeling of this wave curling over at that bottom edge there. But I want a sharp edge here, so I'm deliberately letting that dry whilst I come up into here with those stronger blues. So back up into here now, and let's drop in the stronger blue all the way along here as it curls, that wave curls over there. Still painting a fairly soft edge because I'm painting wet next to wet, so that this wave is curling in. So we carry on with this dark colour, dropping a bit more of the darker in now on top of the wave, a little bit over the top edge of it, like that. Little touches as the wave curls. We've got these lighter areas, curls over, comes a little bit darker underneath. And we're starting to get the feel of the edge of that wave now, which I'm going to make a little bit harder in just a moment again. Comes right in down there. And we'll just keep curling that wave over the top. And you can now start to see this wave beginning to appear, which is rather fun. Is this dry enough yet? No, almost. I've got to wait till that's dry to put this darker blue line along in a minute. I'm going to be very careful. And watercolour is just so much to do with timing. These little bits of water just coming in, these lines coming in here as I go down. Right, that wave, believe it or not, is the basic of it is almost done now. A little bit more green into there, I'll take a little touch of the green and drop in some deeper green under here. And it's a little bit warmer on top, so you've got to really look for colour, always really look for your colours. Just take a wee touch of whatever that is there. It looks like a alizarin, but it's not working. There we go, that's it. And that alizarin's going to come along the bottom edge. Just a moment, but it's also coming along the top edge of the wave slightly here. and down into here. A little bit warmer as the wave comes over, so I'm putting a little bit of purple into my deep blue here. And then I'm going to deliberately bring along under the edge of the wave, while it's still softer, that warm colour. A little bit of brown now. Really looking for these colours. A little bit of brown coming along the bottom of that wave. Breaking up underneath as it comes over there. And again back into the top of the wave. It's just starting to dry off a bit. So I'm now feeling the top edge of this wave. A bit more of my blue. And the paint is gradually drying, and as the paint is drying I've got more control of the paint as it comes into the folding of this wave. Right, we've got that bit. Now I've got to leave, I've got to put the sand in next, and I've got to leave white areas for the sand as well. So, and I also want to be a little bit stronger underneath here, underneath these clouds. I'm going back to my cerulean blue again and just paint in and around the clouds a little more here. Now it's a bit drier, I can afford to be a fraction stronger under there, to some of the clouds, make them show out a bit, because we really do want this strong Caribbean feel around those clouds. There we go, that's given the really bright clouds. And I'm going to just use a little bit of dry brush. The water now is getting a bit mucky, so that's nice. I can just soften some of these cloud edges just a bit. Just drag a little bit of dry brush over the surface, just to link in those clouds a fraction. There we go. Now let's look at the beach here. We've got to let that dry off now before I can do anything else, so we'll look at the beach. We've got a purpley colour going on here with white left behind, so I've got to come in darker and deliberately, unless I go in with the white paint afterwards, I've got to start leaving bits of white and foam in zigzags and a white edge going all the way along here where the water finishes. Right up, and I'm going to go just into the edge here. I'm going to let it just, that's almost dry, that paint look, and I can just gently blend it a fraction. That comes all the way through to here. That's going to be a lot warmer there, leaving these little bits of white just snaking through these foam bits. Now, quite a strong, deep purpley blue. Take a little bit of red. My Prussian, and colours pretty weak. That's better. And we're coming quite strong under here, underneath this wave. Slightly broken effect. It's not a complete line. As the wave breaks, it's slightly broken. And whilst this is still wet again, I can come back into here. It's just wet enough to still spread in and get underneath this bit of wave here. I want these effects and just feel that wave breaking over. So you can see the wave appearing now. And that's, this darker colour is coming out into the sand. Now we need to go to warmer. I'll take some of that cobalt violet from earlier and just bring that into play here, which makes these cools seem cooler. So we don't just put one colour on stronger and stronger, we put the opposites into the painting. We've got our white areas now. I start to need some more yellow ochre colour, which I seem to have here, so let's see if we can get that working. Bit more yellow going on into the water there. Bit messy, but it'll be alright. And down here, again I'm going to bring my cooler lemon yellow to play first of all, right the way along there for the sand. Let it come into the water here and into the waves, because it's going to be reflecting through the bottom of that wave. Curling over with the bits of white, and then the more orange pink. So if we can get that colour going. I'll be very thin with my paint now. There we go. So we've got our wave forming now. Is this dry enough yet? Quite humid today, so just dry enough I think to have a go at that. So whilst this dries off now, I'm going to go back up to the horizon line, and I'm going to go from my oval mop to a round, number 8 isn't it? Can't see. Yes, exactly, that's spot on, number 8. And I've got to try and paint along here a fairly straight line, and I want to be fairly strong with my cerulean again, so as I haven't got that I'm going to have to use yet again my acrylic from before. Not ideal, but it's working. Let's see, there we go. And I need to be able to paint a fairly straight line, get a fairly straight line along here. So not far out, we'll do that once again. Try and get a line all the way along. Okay, thanks, I've got it now. There we go. And again. Right, that's quite nice. And then I'm going to blend that acrylic colour, that cerulean blue, down and into here. And I want to make the brush a little bit drier, so I'm going to just drag it across the surface like this, to get the sparkling effect of the water, to let this knot paper, which I think it is, just sparkle through a bit. But it's fun, you can see the idea, can't you, Emma? Mm-hmm. Yep, you'll have a go at this later yourself, yes. And dragging that quickly and just lively across the top of the paper here. Don't get too bogged down with trying to be too perfect with it. Use the effect, the accidental effects. Don't try and copy the photographs too much, in other words. Now we'll bring that blue across a bit more into the wave now, especially into here. As it curls over, we've got that colour shining through. We're starting to feel more the texturing of the wave as it comes over there, so I'm putting little curly marks in here. And once that's dry, I've got to put a much darker colour over that as well. But whilst I'm waiting for that to dry, I'll just prepare it, because we need some. Now it's getting a bit drier, we can start to just drop in some of these slightly stronger into the wet bits, stronger blues, a little bit more here to reflect from the sky. We're gradually building this watercolour up. There we go. Feel that wave coming across and down and over. Right, now at this stage we have to let things dry off, because we now, from now on, really want to be painting much harder edged details in to make this look wet. So we let that dry off a bit, but I'm going to just put a little bit more sand in here. It's a little bit of what I hope is burnt sienna, just slightly warm, a little bit of that burnt sienna, and a tad of, we'll just drop in some soft edges there and put a bit more detail in a moment with the harder edges, just to get the feeling of the warmth on the edge of the sand there and down to here as well. Right, that has to dry, so we'll just take a 2-minute break. Our painting is just dry enough. There's still some slightly wet areas, but now is the time to come back with my ruler. Okay. So first of all I have to paint an ultramarine across here, and then I'm going to put a bit of the Prussian into that. So I'll mix up my strong ultramarine, nice band of it to go all the way across, and we'll try and paint a fairly thin line across here. Don't want too heavy a line, all the way across again, all the way across here. I don't want a sparkle this time, so I do want a nice solid line of ultramarine right the way across. There we are. That's nice, thank you. Now I'm going to just drag that ultramarine across here at the edges to let it ripple into the sea next to it and get this effect of slightly sparkly sea. So I'm just dragging it over the surface like that, look, just to break up that edge a fraction. Now I want to go back with my stronger blue. This is my Prussian again, a much darker blue. Just along the top edge of it, and drop this in, and we'll make this top edge, that's better, darker. All the way along the top edge, and that, because we're painting wet into the wet, that will drop downwards and just blend in gradually. Went a little bit higher there, and that gives us that lovely deep blue. Now down here we're back to now, because the paint is drier, we can start to paint in more detail here, and we're working paint over dry, so wet over dry, which gives me the chance to now actually start to paint some textures in and really get a bit more detail in here, in and around the top of this wave, and make it start to look like a wave. Same there. And this picks it up in the foreground. And around these pieces of foam as it comes down, again now we can really start to play these stronger, sharper edged colours around the foam. And when that curls over there, I want it very, very dark there. I'm going to use quite heavy paint now, quite thick paint down here, to really start to feel this broken edge of the surf as that wave just breaks over there beautifully. And in and around and down, we feel the wave coming over these little curves, the top of it here. And certainly much, much darker under this bit as it comes over there. Right up deep into there. And there's our wave coming across. Now under here, below that foam, we've got a few bits of dark to put in here as well, because it's quite textural all the way along here. Little squiggles and circles and dots and dashes. But down here is a much sharper edge again, so I've got to come in and we'll feel more of that. But it's much warmer. And amongst these little bits of sand that we had earlier, I need to start making it a little more detailed. And we get little bits of dots and dashes and where that edge of that water comes in. The same here. We've got slightly sharper edges on the edge of that wave, and this starts to make it look more glassy because we've got rough against smooth, light against dark, rough against smooth, warm against cool. And this lovely soft wave just gently breaking over in this Caribbean light. Now down here, I want to do a little bit of glazing and just start to leave and feel the wet sand there. So this is a glaze or a wash over a colour. And that painting is as near as damn it for me. I'm not going to do a lot more on this because it's working quite well. Oops, Emma's just going to do a tipsy and I'm going to film it and get £200 from You've Been Framed. Now, break that down into there because it's a more broken effect of surf. There we go. Now what I'm going to do now is just take a little bit of pastel, and for the fun of it, I'm just going back and I'm just going to use a little bit of pastel here just to break in one or two bits of white just to show you what can be done, and using that pastel to twist the marks down there. You can go along this edge of this water here. Could use white gouache, equally the same, but just to bring some of the whites back that I lost earlier, to show you that you don't have to be perfect with your preliminary work, and how these waves, the whites, can now be brought back a little bit here as that comes down and over there. We'll just glisten across the top of the water a fraction there. Don't need to do much of this, it's just really to show you the technique of what can be done and how that wave can come down and through into there. And then the whites here too, coming forward. And there we are. I think that'll do for that little demonstration. Works fairly well. But I will just put a signature on that. Just a little bit of tidying up here and there now. I think we can afford to go behind the wave just slightly more in places like that to bring out a few of the ripples behind there. Don't want to make too much because it'll spoil the... I shall soften those back in a moment just a little bit. But we already had our soft effects when we painted wet into wet earlier. So what I'm doing now is putting some slightly harder edges back in to work against the foil of the smoother wave as it breaks over. We'll just drag that across the top a bit as well. And there we are. I think that's quite a nice little piece, and it'll do for the demonstration of what I wanted to do. So Caribbean beach and a nice gentle wave lapping in here. A little bit more work, but not a lot to do down here, just to bring that wave out. There we go. A little bit more of the blues, but not too much. Greens underneath the wave as it breaks. There we are. This is the composition I'm going to do of these two macaws, and we're going to try the acrylic inks. In this case we're going to be using these nice FW ones. They're very strong, they're water mixed, but once they're dry that's it. So if you want to work into them you have to keep them damp all the time. A little diffuser or spray is useful for that. We can put them into the ordinary plastic palettes and use my watercolour brushes with them and water. As I say, just make sure you clean everything really well, because like acrylics, they are acrylic inks. Once they're dry, that's the finish, you can't move them. But we can use them in just the same way as we would with watercolours. Right, let's get into this then, because some wonderful bright colours to use. Here are a couple of the birds that we're going to use to paint from. Now in the technique of watercolour, we don't normally use white because we have the white paper, but with the acrylic inks, we can go either way. If we want to, we can use pastel over the top or even paint acrylics in later. But we still will start with the lightest and brightest colours so they stay clean. We can drop one into another or one next to another. I'm going to start here with these yellow areas around the bird's wing, and into the oranges. And I'm going to actually drop some of the red into those yellows to make it a much brighter, stronger orange, to give them a much stronger and brighter effect. And use one colour into and next to another to get wet into wet effects as well. This is like the bird's feathers. To control that very carefully, we call those things controlled accident. First of all, we'll take a bit of our yellow and just drop it onto those areas, not wet into wet yet. Some of the lighter yellow, my lemon yellow here, nice and clean, and drop that into these areas of the parrot that we want that colour to be in. Thorough coat all the way down of the lemon yellow. Just give a graduation of tone. And now I'm going to add a little bit of a very light orange. And this is our wet into wet technique I was talking about, where we let one colour flood into another. It'll give us a nice fluffy feathery effect. And we get this controlled accident. Same up here, we want some of that orange coming in. Up here, now these feathers there, orange comes in and up. And we go a bit stronger still with that orange. Into here, a bit more, slightly more flamey. Tad more into here. Just these indications here. Now, while that's drying off, we can start to look at these yellow-green areas here. And if I put in the lemon yellow here and then bring some of my turquoise over, so if I take some of this lemon yellow and put that in on these areas of the parrot where it's slightly greener, and add some of the cerulean into that, it will give me that green, and I have got the greens here I can use as well. But let's be nice and fresh and actually mix our colours too. We'll take our lemon yellow, and because we're working downwards it's not going to flood back up into there. We don't want it to flood into that one either. That's drying off now anyway. If we paint wet next to dry, then it won't flood into the dry area. So we have to be careful that we time these things just right. Now, if I take a little of the green, add some blue in a moment, so we'll just tint in some of our light green here. If we want harder edges, we can do that when it's all dry. When the thing's dry, we can paint wet over the dry and get a harder edge. This is giving us soft edges at the moment. That green comes down there, onto his breast. And while this is still wet, we'll just tint a tad of that green into some of the shaded areas of this, just to give the feeling of some shadow into the bird here. We'll take some of the turquoise now, and the turquoise with the lemon yellow will give me a green anyway. So if I start to bring that turquoise in, look at the beautiful green we get here now. Because it will mix for us as the paint is wet into wet, and this turquoise will actually give us a beautiful turquoisey green. It would be difficult to get this sort of freshness if we tried mixing that and then painting it on afterwards. These really are techniques you can only get by using the paint freshly around these edges. You can see the variety of greens we're getting here now. While I'm on that and still on the turquoise, we'll use some of that thin down here. I can come back to here and I can lift out an area there with a dry brush, just dry my brush off and lift out a little bit to make it darker into that corner. And take a little bit of the deeper blue and just add it into there to give a bit of tone shading around that harder edge. And that is the wet into wet again, because now I'm dropping the deep blue into the light. It's the same down here. There we have. Look at those lovely effects we can get. Now, well, you see that's how that's spread out there. Let's have a look at that bit. You can see here how the wet into wet is spread out, giving us that feathery effect. Okay, we'll carry on down with the light blue here, all the way down this wing. I only need one brush for this job, one number 6 in this case. I'll brush along with that. And use my deeper blue again where it's required, here. And to blend in a bit around this bit here, wet into wet effects, the fluffiness of those feathers, and let the wet paint do the work by gravity. Let's come up to the parrot's head now. We can leave where it is white, in this area white, but we want to look at the green on top of the head. So again, rather than go straight in with green, I'm going to come in with the lemon yellow. So, down to there. And then bring in some of the green gently afterwards to have full control of the variety of wet into that. So then, with my light green, I come in just tickling it in and letting the wet into wet technique, letting gravity do the job. We can go stronger by adding stronger green, or by, as we did before, in this case a little bit of the turquoise, and the turquoise in there will give us that lovely green. Just tickling it in around these feathered edges here to give this fluffy effect. Got a slight shine on the end of his beak there, which I've just painted over. Handle that. We can use them thinly like this, just like watercolour. And we'll work on the other parrot. Let's start with his beak. And now this one should be dry enough to do a little bit more of the details on this one as well. All the way across. We'll do a foundation of the yellow first. Now we can drop in that red, but let's start with the orange. Beautiful flame orange. You see how it's spreading out? We let the technique do the work. We let gravity do the work for us. Now we're going to put in these really lovely bright flame reds that we didn't have just now. Strangely enough, a little purple here now, which is on the opposite end of things. It's cooler because some of the shading in the back here. Just again tickling it in, letting the paint, the gravity do the work, letting it spread out. A brush tip, and just start to pull out some of these finer details of the parrot's feathers. We need to continue with a very light blue now, so I'm going to bring my water for the tail down to keep it clean, and just wet this area. Now down this bit here, there's a very deep blue line later where the shadow comes, but right now all I want is a very, very light turquoise. So I'm thinning my turquoise right down and dropping it into this water to give myself a very light blue. Here is a very strong turquoise. See how much stronger I'm painting it up and around these feathers to link in with that earlier colour. If we bring this blue over that yellow, then we have the green again that we were after earlier. And we do want some of that green coming down into this, so we'll take some of the yellow and bring that into this blue we've just laid, so that the two will blend together a bit more. Then we have to change our blues again, because the blue here is quite a different blue. It's this much warmer. Starting from that top edge of that feather, we'll let it drop down through and create our feather shape for us. Just one stroke, and if the paint is of the right consistency, then all being well, we get our feather effects for the wing. And I mentioned there earlier about how that whole block here is in shadow. So this area here is all one big lump of shadow, and we'll come in under there. Stronger blue again, and just while it's still damp, just pick out these feathers a little, just to give a little more three dimension here. We'll go back up to our oranges again, because in this area here the tail actually comes out right through there, and under here in places, with some more red and some more orange. Tail of two parrots, or two tails of two parrots. This area here, again, we want wet into wet. What I'm going to do first is paint, in fact, the blue area here, and then we'll do the lighter areas afterwards. We'll let that dry just a little, and you'll see the difference in the dry edge to the wet edge. How simple that was, and we get a slightly nice spreading there of wet into wet, only fractionally. Now I need to come back with my blue and make that a bit stronger, especially up here, and down some of these feathers. Very dark shadow that works under the whole parrot here. And some of that warmer colour to give us a bit more depth, some of the purple just coming down into here, touch of rays coming on around here, these feathers, just to delineate where they are. Just a little bit more fine detail on the heads now. Very fine shading on the beak. We want it to remain white, but it just needed a little shading to make it a bit rounder. It has these rather attractive lines coming down. The parrot's virtually done. We can look at this bit of branch coming through here. I want it to just disappear into the background, so what I'm going to do now is to wet that to a very light blue wash. I want it to actually disappear into the background here in the end. We'll let those colours blend down in. Same here. Clean wash of water all the way up here into this branch, because I want that branch to blend into it all. Doing the background very abstract, wet into wet wash. We'll have some light greens coming into it in places. Right down here. Keep it nice and wet, keep it lovely and wet. And we go to our darker greens. Start dropping those in around it. And we can start to use some of the colours that are in the actual painting to give a lot more of the undergrowth and depth to this. One of the beauties of acrylic inks is that you can actually work them over the top at the very end. We finished our painting, but I just want to brighten things up a little. To finish off with, we can just use a little bit of pastel if we want, for the fine detail, and just to bring some of the colours up. In this case I want to use a little bit of pink to bring up some of the sheen on these feathers with the reds. We need to decide what mount we're going to put onto it. We might decide on a lighter coloured mount, or a darker coloured one. Now this is going to be a rather exciting larger piece. It's a full sheet of watercolour paper, £140 knot, so it's neither smooth nor rough in this case. And the paper will give us just enough texture when we're putting the pastel over to give us a snowy effect. If you want something very fine using this technique, you'd use a smooth paper, and of course if you want something very coarse, then you could use a rougher paper. What we're going to do here is, I've already drawn out, as you see, the pencil drawing, then I've gone over with my Chinagraph, then I've gone over with my Chinagraph pencil to make these very dark areas, and the Chinagraph pencil is virtually waterproof, so these darks will remain. It's quite a nice way of working. I'm going to paint watercolour over the top first, and then I'm going to paint pastels on and brush the water over them and blend them in. We could use just pastel only if I wanted to. It's a lovely way to work, and you can mix pastels with watercolour. The only difference really is that watercolour is a very fine pigment and is mixed with gum arabic, and the pastels are a slightly coarser pigment mixed with gum arabic, and they're solid. If we have pastel dust left over at the bottom of an easel, say, we could remix that dust with water and make a pastel again. So it's a very similar thing. The watercolour is just simply the pigment bound together with gum arabic, and then when you put liquid on it will soften, and the pastel will do the same. So we can either put water on first and put the pastel on, which is very dark, or we can put the pastel on and brush it in, or vice versa. It also means if you have a watercolour that's overworked, you're not happy with, you can rework the watercolour using pastel over the top. You can put the opaque colour over, in other words, because pastel will be opaque. And it's a very exciting, loose way to work, and I think for this particular snow scene it's going to be ideal. So we'll have some fun doing this, shall we? Now the materials I'm going to need, I've got my photograph I'm going to work from, my set of units and soft pastels, a couple of palettes ready with watercolours ready to go, my set of brushes. I'm only going to need this one brush, in fact, I think, this large oval mop, but I might use a smaller round later, because you can actually paint with the pastel if you want darker thin lines, so I may use a bit of that later. The rest of the brushes I'll put away, and that's it. We can just get going. At first we'll make it a standard watercolour painting. Fairly wet into wet, we want really light backgrounds. So as you see, this pencil doesn't move with the water. Nice big wash of water all the way down it, just to establish my colours underneath. Now for painting pastel over watercolour, if you're not just doing straight pastel with water, you do want the watercolour to be nice and strong, nice and dark, especially if you're doing flower paintings with it. We'll show you that later. It's another lovely technique of using acrylic inks with pastels, where you can get really vibrant effects that you simply can't get very easily with other paints. And this is what this DVD is about. It's about how to use the best medium for the subject matter and the effect you want. So if you want really bright, vibrant flowers, then you can use these acrylic inks, for instance, with water and with pastel to get a vibrancy that you simply can't get in any other way. Even with oil paints, it's difficult to get that real vibrance. Okay, I haven't stretched this paper. It's just painting straight on, because it'll dry out again anyway. Nice and level, even with the tape I've got on. Right, so plenty of water, right down to the bottom, right up to the edges. There we go. Oh, it's a lovely way to paint. And you get very involved, of course, painting in this way, because you're almost a part of the painting. It's so physical. A bit like throwing a pot, where it's almost like Tai Chi, where you get so involved with actually making the shape, because it's so much of a struggle physically to throw a great big pot. There we go, plenty of water running down it. Now we could paint this flat, but obviously for demonstration purposes it's more difficult for me. I've got to paint it on the vertical. And we'll start off with our very light colours. In this case I'm going to want my aureolin yellow, which is one of my lightest yellows. A lovely light yellow up here. And I'm going to make it, say, quite strong, because I can come back in with the pastel afterwards. Wet into wet effects. As we come down here, right down through there. This is quite light behind here. We can put lighter colours in there later with the pinks and so on, nothing to worry. And then I'm going to come across to my cobalt violet. And I'm not worried about it blending down or running down. Even if you get trickles running back to the paper, it won't matter, because I can go with the pastel afterwards. So you might like it just as a watercolour when I'm done, but not what we're intending today. We're going to do the whole... it's your painting, of course, when it comes to it. When you're working, you do as you want. If you decide, oh wow, I've turned out a lovely loose watercolour this way, because it's such a lovely loose way of working, and you don't want to go beyond it into pastel, well, of course you don't, do you? You do what you want. And already we're getting some nice tints. Got our violet. I'm going to go to a rose now, and up through here. Oh, too much, but don't worry. Blend it out. We're going to put other colours in there. Right, now onto our cool blues. Warm wet into wet here, very rapidly, to keep our wet into wet effects. These lovely wet into wet, snowy effects of the stuff dribbling down through there. We're starting to get a little bit warmer with our distant colours there, a little bit of rose into them. See, it's an enjoyable way of using watercolour like I'm doing here. You might decide this is the way to go with the watercolours instead, so you just go away and do watercolour instead. So we'll let that dry and then we'll carry on with the pastel afterwards. Right, now we can make a start on the pastels. Put a little bit of cream pastel into here, even on there, and you can see immediately how you don't have to use masking fluid with this way of working. It's immediate. Let's see, where do we go from there? There's a house there. Bit of white there, cream there. You can pick out the highlights and even scumble it just like you can ordinary pastel, in other words you can blend it across, you don't have to use the water. I'm just putting in a few highlights at the minute just to give you an idea of how it can be used, you see. But we can use darks and lights, so we'll start to work up some of these colours. We have some beautiful colours to use here as well. Lovely blues as well. Now let's just put a little bit of pastel on there, and I'm going to take some clean water and just blend that. You'll see what I mean by the fact that pastel can be used like watercolour. Now I can actually use the water to blend that blue in and paint it just like I did the watercolour. And I'm going to take a very dark colour now, deliberately, and put some of that here. And let me show you how we can use the brush then to use that to draw with. In other words, I could actually draw out a line here across the paper with the dark watercolour, with the dark mixture of pastel and water. I can brush it down and in and treat it just like the watercolour. We might need to just blend a little of these blues back there. Just coming into the very distance there were some paler blues. Actually we've got clean water, and you can, now is the time when you can subtly play with these tints. Tints of greeny blues coming up here through the background. To pick out all sorts of fun colours here and there. A little bit of warm coming in there could be useful. Tint it in with some water. And I think it may even be just catching the top of the chimney here a fraction too. Maybe a bit too much, so what we have to do is take it off. So we're getting well on with this pastel now. It's only really little highlights and delicate areas that we've got to do. And it seems to me that we're about there. So we just have to finish off a little bit down here now. Cools here and there, and a bit of delineation of foreground. Pinks going on in there, we'll just use those to help the blues sing. I've got a feeling there may even be a little touch of green, you know, just here and there, just to help bring things out of it. Yes, there we go, that's a really pretty little bit of green to go in there. I thought there might be some, you know, around the place. And a cooler green down here maybe, just a touch of it, reflecting in the snow. That's better, isn't it? Something small like that can just help us finish off our picture. Yep, that will do it, I think. Now where do we sign it? I don't want the signature to get in the way. Actually, it'd be nicer signed in the left than the right in a way. There we go. Well, now we've finished disc 1 and we'll move on to disc 2 and do even more different techniques and methods and materials for you. And this first picture on the disc I'm going to do, I'm going to do these twisted old birch trees on some heathland. And I felt the best method for this was going to be to show you some pen and ink work and brush and ink, maybe even a bit of stick and ink, a little bit of watercolour wash and some texturing again, and then finish up with a bit of white gouache just to bring the trees out, to show you how simple it can be. But it's going to be rather fun to do all this fine work with the pen and ink. So let's look at the materials we're going to need. We're using £140 knot paper, an intermediate paper today, although a hot press would be just as good for this pen and ink work. With pen and ink work I always prefer to do the pen and ink first and then the watercolour wash afterwards, otherwise you can get rather busy and scratchety with it. Piece of stick to do stick and ink with the Indian ink, a bottle of Indian ink, 2 waterproof fine line pens which are great for doing the fine twigs and branches or cross-hatching work, a small brush, and I'll have my wash brush as well just to finish off with the washes, and that should be all I need. Well, I'm going to start off with my heavier work. I'm going to start off with my stick and ink work with the stick and a little bit of Indian ink, pour some into my palette. Indian ink, wonderful stuff, waterproof afterwards once it's dried, but be careful where you get it because obviously it's very dangerous stuff in the fact that it is waterproof, and if you get it all over yourself you can be in a right mess. So stick and ink, brush and ink are both beautiful ways to work. So I can work with either my stick or my brush to do this sort of work. It's amazing how much of a line you can make with a bit of stick like this. I'll just dip it into my palette and you'll see what I mean. I'm not going to even bother drawing in pencil on this. I'm just going to go straight in with the stick. This paper is very absorbent. It's actually a bit nicer on ordinary cartridge paper. But you know, you can draw a line 1 inch long this way quite easily. I'll go right the way down here, and I haven't got to recharge this bottle at all yet. So I can use my stick or a fine brush to do this work. I'm going to just build up all of these trees, all these tangled branches, and the stick is ideal for this because you can get this of these ancient wind-blown branches coming up here. I just got to build up these trunks first. A double line there because that is a whole trunk, and one here as well the same, although I'm going to paint white in between later if I need to. And the usual business of trees growing from thick to thin, never thin to thick. Some wonderful shapes here that are twisting, and I can just simulate. I'm not going to emulate, I'm not going to. More and more and more of these, build them up. We have a whole lattice work, which is again what I think this picture is about. All these little twigs and lattice work of branches. At the moment just with the bit of stick, but later we'll use the pens. And I'm going to use the brush as well when I finish off. Okay, we've really done all our medium branches now. It's about time to start on the little tiny ones. So I'll put away my bit of stick, pick up one of the pens, and we'll start to do all these little fine lines, masses and masses and masses of them. Right, now I'm going to move to my brush, number 6 round, and we'll start to look at some of these slightly heavier marks on the black ink with that. We've done our sticker ink, now I can do from thick to thin with the brush, just pushing a bit harder with the brush. I come down into here, and we start to get some of these rather nice dark branches then coming in. Snake-like, lovely dark. I can think about the washes in the background colours. To give more of an effect of these twigs at the end, I'm going to take my wash brush and with a bit of clean water just drop in where a lot of these tangles are in these areas. Just get a little bit of the ink is shifting because it's still wet, so that's alright, I don't mind that. And I'm just going to drop into those areas a little of the black. and then come back with my brush and blend them. And while I'm at it, I'm going to look at where the horizon line is behind here. And there's some lovely darks going on in there. Put the water into there. And let's look at drawing with the brush now. So we're doing an ordinary tonal work with Indian ink, stick and fine line pens and some brushes. It's a rapid way of working, it's a rather lovely way. And again, just a touch of my ink, and let's look at where these dark areas are here. Around the trees, coming along and down to the grasses. Let the gravity do the work as well. All the way back into here, and we'll do our colours at the very end. Lovely effects we can get them. Shadow coming down right up from the trees here, right through here. Standard watercolour techniques, just feel some of the grasses a bit. Dark actually comes from right down here, very black down there, working through it. Quite fun working like this. So that's our tonal work done. Now we let that dry and then we'll come back with some colour afterwards, a little bit of white gouache, and then we have a lovely loose way of working that's very effective. Right, well the ink is now dry enough to work on, so we're going to put our watercolour wash over this now, and then finally work up the gouache at the end. Right, now then the watercolours, going to go straight in. I'm going to mess about too much here. Take a little bit of cobalt violet, just lighten the scarf a bit. You see the paint isn't moving now, thank heavens. So a little bit of warmth into there, and then the cerulean blue. Right round under there, round to the sky here. All the way around to there. Now come down to here, and I want to put in some of the lighter yellows first. So we'll just establish those aureolin yellows there. And we'll come into our stronger colours. We'll take some still wet, we'll take some cobalt, add that up there, just to keep it more blue. Put that trickle on in. Same down through here. And a bit of ultramarine come through these areas. Start giving us some greens. Those are quite strong down in the shadows here, so we'll really hit them down amongst the trees. You might like it just as it was. I mean, I quite like the thing as it was just now. But I thought we'll take it a stage further just so you can see what can be done. And then finally, a bit of sap green going on around here just to tint some greens in. Slightly going in the sky too there. So you can see what we can do now with this technique, and you can use it as you want. I'm going to come back to my we'll see now where it's gone. Some slightly warmer colours going on down here, I feel. Give it more vibrancy. Maybe a touch of the warms in the background, a little bit of rose going into here. Before we come down to our final colours, a bit of purple and some ultramarine down here. Into these shadows again. Right, let that dry and then we'll come back with our final little touches of white gouache just to bring these colours out. And that will do that painting. And finally on this painting we take the round brush and some white gouache, mix it up so it's nice and creamy and not too thin, almost like a thin cream. And then we can look at where these light areas come on the edge of the tree down here. They're slightly broken, they're not completely solid down here. And they're coming in all over the picture there. Come right down through here. And same here. So you can see the permutations we could have here. You can see how it could have been left just with the white and the washes, or we can bring it right up as fine as we want with colour and detail later. even down to some of the grasses here. We can put a bit of detail back into the highlights, just the light catching the tips of the grasses here. There we go, about done. Just finish off here and then we'll get on to our next painting for you. So that's the use of white gouache. We're going to be using watercolour pencil, and the idea of this is for this botanical painting we're going to do, which is much more delicate, very fine. and we could use ordinary watercolour techniques. But I just wanted to show you what can be done with these watercolour pencils, how you can use them as a coloured pencil, or you can actually blend them with water and use them as a watercolour. You can link them with solid watercolours if you want as well. They're quite useful for doing very fine and very delicate work then. And we've got pastel pencils here as well, and we've got ordinary colour pencils if we need them. It's a lovely set, this. Anyway, that's the set we're going to be using, and all I need is one little round brush to go with it and the water, and we're away. Well, I've done my basic drawing in pencil. Now I want to go in with a fine line pen and very carefully put all the little details. Go straight in with the watercolour pencil, or watercolour now. If it was an ordinary watercolour, that's what I would do. I wouldn't bother with the pen. But I thought for this technique you'd like to see the different ways that we can use, different ways that we can illustrate something, different way we can use materials together, which again is what this film is about, isn't it? So I'm now working over the pencil with a fine line pen, and then we'll get on with our colour after this. Just delicately feeling the edges. Make sure that your marks are about the object. So if there's a broken edge on the object, then that's what you do as well. You don't just do tram lines around things with pen and ink or any pencil drawing. If you make a really good edge to a drawing, you'll need much less shading. If you make a tram line around something, just a flat, hard edge, then it doesn't matter how much shading you do, it's still not going to work very well. So it's important that we really do observe and look at how things are created here. And do very, very delicate lines where there are very, very delicate lines. So I'm just indicating some of these objects as if they will appear ghostly into the picture. Well, now the ink is ready and dry, the first thing we do is to rub off all the old pencil marks from the original drawing. Bring everything back to nice clean black and white again. And then we're ready to go on with our watercolour pencil, which we'll do very delicately. For the illustration part with the watercolour pencil, I've got my jar of water and my pencils ready. We're only going to be tinting lightly, we're not going to be going over the top with this. And so we start with, in this case with these little flowers, I'm going to start with one colour over the top. We will start with our lightest colours. So we start in this case with the yellows in the centre of the flowers. And watercolour, remember, we always start with the lightest colours first. So all the centres of these little flowers. And as I say, already that gives us a little bit of colour and brightness to liven the thing up. Alright, we've done all the flowers like that there. Then we come in with the next colour. And the next colour for us here is a very light violet, which I'm going to put over the whole things. Some areas are lighter than others, so I'm pushing harder in some places than I am on others, just to get the tinting. And later we're going to look at the shadows on these, because we're going to need to make two different blues, and I only have one blue in my set, so I'm going to have to use it lighter, harder and lighter, unless I use, of course, the water with it to lighten it out that way. And now we come down to our blue. And we can start to tint the blue in, letting this mauve shine through. So you have to look carefully. There's no time where you don't have to observe. You're always observing, you're always checking that you're doing the right colours. So that petal comes underneath that one, therefore I've made it much darker. Much darker still under here as well. Very much darker, so I'm making much more blue there. And just gently come out here with graduating the shade out from here, so it's darker underneath those petals there. Here it's darker. Let's just see what happens when we dampen the brush down. and we can soften that in with the brush just to make the colour a bit stronger in places. There we go. And once it's on the brush, we can take it to other places as well. So if we're using that same blue, I can come into other places with it and paint with that like that, you see. Let that dry off, clean the brush immediately because you never know when you're going to want it again. We need to go to the greens of the leaves here, and for those, again, we start with our lighter colours, and I want to start with the edges of the leaves where they're a bit greener. So I'm going to use my lemon yellow here at first, just where the light catches some of the leaves. Be careful, there's a wet area, don't drag your hand over it. Just softening into the background of the paper to get the feeling of these leaves coming round behind the plants. You can see I'm doing a little bit of cross-hatching there as well. Not that we need very much, but just a little to blend. Take that dark down and through here a little bit just to tint it in. Now if I want to come back to my brush, especially for this one here, I can use that just to blend and soften in here to make sure the water's clean. Like that, those angles there, and maybe just a tad into the background here as well, just blending it round. Possibly here a little bit. So we can use the delicacy of watercolour pencil. Let's move on to our bee, and on the top of his leg there he has a little lemon yellow coming around the back here, and just a tint of the lemon yellow, and then there's a much warmer yellow. So we're going to take some of the around here, and actually he's warmer still yet, so I've done these bits of his body down here, around that side of that, to give that some roundness, you see. I'll just come in with a warmer brown still. In fact, a little sienna will be nice there. Even over the black, because it'll just tint it a fraction. Just around that bit. And even over the black itself to give it a bit more colour. Now we come down to the flowers here, which are very delicate, so it's ideal for watercolour pencil. And we just want to shade those ever so gently. Again, I'm going to use a little bit of my violet, and just ever so gently cross-hatch where the shadow is down here of the petals here. And we'll come down to these white ones in a minute. I've got to go back onto those with my light blue again. In the background here, just go over the top very lightly indeed, just gently picking out. You see we can get the delicate colours there, and then I need to look at the very light greens that are happening inside here. Those delicate greens that are coming in through the petals as well. Actually linking into these colours, quite strong there in places. Come back in with the stronger green in a moment. And look how delicate we can make this. I'm going to just shade behind here a little, give the feeling of this green so that these petals stand out into the stronger greens. blue-grey going on in the shadow here. Let's see if we can get some of that in too. Around that edge of that shadow, quite dark into there. Now these very light coloured mayflowers, they can almost be left white, but I want to just tint them. And in the centres they have a little pink going on, a little of the violet. So we'll start off with our lightest colours again, and we'll look at little violet areas of the stamens. Because we're coming down to this area now, and the bird. So down all around these little light delicate areas of the stamens. And we're coming with the delicate greys in a moment and blues. We notice in the centre of those flowers there's a bit of yellow going on. So we'll just take some of the yellow and tint into the centres as well here. Slightly warmer green, and just into some of these petals just tint a little of that green under the shadows to link together everything. And then to our greys. Branches aren't just brown, you have to look for these colours. So it comes into the, because the bird is in shadow here, it comes in underneath the bird all the way through. I'm going to give the bird a coat of violet to push it into the shadow behind here. Bring some warms into this now. And get the shadow right and softer. Just to give a little depth to it. Not a lot, very, very delicately, yeah? To give it a feeling of other things happening in the background. Let's go to the daffodils now. And again we want to start with our lightest colours, so we'll come to the lemon yellow and go right the way through with the lemon yellow there. And you'd be surprised how much green there is in these yellows for the shading. I'm going to bring blues and greens over these yellows to give the effect of shadow in these petals. Now the greens I was talking about, we start to shade those greens into the petals where they are. I'm using a cooler, more bluey green now. We need some much warmer oranges here, so I'm going to come back now with cadmium orange. Start to work into here, and maybe there's a little bit of the orange coming into these warm yellows as well. There's almost a violet going on inside here. There we go. And then we come finally down to the cherry blossom here. Again, I'm going to need my violet, and I'm also going to want obviously some pinks now as well. I'm going to start with the pinks because they're the lightest colour. And there are a few creams in these edges of these leaves too. Surprising, but it's there. And then we'll start on our pinks. And to make that pink seem warmer, we'll come in with our violet now. And look quite carefully where the shadows are. Some's coming up behind here. Need to bring some of this colour across here as well, just to balance things out. And I'll take my brush, again, make sure the brush is clean, and we'll just link that in places here. Peach blossom here yet, so let's look at those wonderful deep reds we have going on in there inside these, because that's going to change the colours a lot as well. Maybe a tad more pink, and just touching into one or two of these. This water lily, and it's going to be a straightforward wet in wet watercolour. Nothing fancy. We haven't done just one simple example of this technique, so we're going to do that now. But the only difference is that instead of doing the whole thing in one go, I'm going to take it section by section. So I'm going to wet a petal at a time first. I'm using a £200 rough paper in this case for this one, it's rather nice. And because it's so heavy and a small piece, I haven't got to bother stretching any of these papers. So I'm going to wet that one. I'm going to wet one a little bit further away so that I can do several at a time, but they will be separated because I want hard edges in between each one. If we have wet onto wet or wet next to wet, we know that they're going to join together, and I don't want that in this case. So if I'll do alternate ones, it should be alright. Using my nice oval mop, my wash brush, very handy brush for the job. And I'm going to start off with a very light cobalt violet, thin layer of that. Starting off fairly strong. We'll do a graduated wash, so we're going to start off quite strong up here. As we come down, we'll let it blend into the paper and become lighter till it just delicately disappears into the base. When I said graduated, it means that I can come back in again and come a bit stronger and let that gently come down. And there's a slight ribbing in the petals of this, so how we're going to achieve that is to, when we come down the second time, is to just drag the tip of the brush down like this. Well, that's the way we can do it, but I want a bit more of that, so I'm going to come round again. And then do just as I was saying. drag the brush down, little strokes, the tip of the brush down. Get the effect of those ribs. Now I can look up to the top here again and give that a second wash there. Drop a bit more in other words. It's a very quick painting, it's a very quick way of working, and bring those down in the ribs. We have a little rose going on, let's have a little touch of that on this edge. That's better, not a lot. A little rose and alizarin in fact. So I'll just touch the alizarin as well, because the alizarin's a bit darker. Just along the edges here. And we'll let those tint in on their own. Then dry that brush off. Come back and just lift out. So it's a dry brush now, just lifting out and dragging down the edge of these to get this wet into wet effect on those same ribs. Up to here, drop in the rose up there. Same way, just bring it down those ribs. And there's a little touch of the same going on here around this edge. Be careful it doesn't get too dry. Just soften that in. And this one I'm going to be slightly different than this one down here in a moment. I'm going to actually put some of the yellow on first, because it's a little bit stronger there, so I want that to be, already have a slight tint of that yellow going on down there. Make sure it doesn't dribble down too much. Now we go back to the top with the cobalt violet, and again we drop in from above. Don't forget that these watercolours always go lighter later, they always dry lighter. And then we can drag those veins through again. Into there, up, round, come back with our little brush again and just a touch of the rose and alizarin into the tip there. Just dragging that down through to give a slight hint of it. Yes, these petals are now dry enough to continue. So we're doing the same with the others. We go up, put a wash of water on, and of course we could come in and paint them directly with a wash, but it's, for this graduated wash it's nicer to be able to come in and have full control within that area. But in fact this time it's going to be more the yellow coming in there. Just blending down and through till we get to the lighter part here. And in this case there's a very slight touch of blue going on under here. We're going to take a little bit of our cobalt, which we're going to use later in fact for the glaze, around that lower edge, which gives a slight greeny tint around there. I'm going to bring that out underneath here in those little serrations. So I'll do slightly harder edge there later, we'll do that when it's dry. Now to find a few petals we haven't done before we do any glazing. So this one, quite strong. Wet against the dry will give us the hard edge. And again up into here. That top bit. and around there, and then we just have to tickle it down. And while that's drying off, I want a very thin wash of the Ariel in yellow, very transparent, thin coat in here, very, very light yellow. Go right up into there. And on the bottom here it's a bit greener, and I need to get some bit of viridian there. I come in there with a slight glaze of yellow and viridian. Use the glazes on this afterwards. So again, we'll let it dry. Once again, the petals are dry, but I'm going to come straight back to that orange, the cadmium orange that I wanted to put in. Test it, and we'll drop those in. Perfect. Quite dark. As they come down, they appear to get a bit more yellow, almost with a yellow halo. So what I'm going to do is put in some chrome yellow areas here and just drop the cadmium orange into those, and that should give us the effect that we have on the photo. There we go. Now finally we've got to come back to our washes, and we've got a very light green wash going on. What we need to do here and over this area. You see how we can give a thin coat over that. And then I take my brush and with clean water on the brush, let it blend in, and that will give me the shadow right up to the edge of this, coming out from underneath there. And I want something similar happening underneath here as well. Now while we're on glazes, I want to use some of that cobalt. Again, I'm going to test it outside, just here, to give me a glaze over this. A blue glaze just coming in here. The shadows on this bit. Just around here carefully. Start to darken that down a bit. The same is going to be going on here, and that glaze, we want it also over this, because I want this petal cooler. And this is a glaze. The washes were the first things we did, but this is actually a glaze of a colour over another to change the whole tone and colour. And I'm going to bring it right down through here, underneath there as well. Make that a little bit darker. Give the whole thing a wash of that to give a very gentle and subtle shadow there. To give us that lovely glow. What we need to do now is work on the background and make some really nice darks in the background here. To do that, I'm going to be painting a bit of wet in wet carefully. Yes, that's quite a nice green. It could be a bit darker, I suppose, but I think it'll be about right. put that right the way through here and add a bit more cool to it in a moment. And as I said, we'll drop in a little bit darker into this as well. I'm going to make a slightly darker green with my ultramarine and burnt sienna, and just bring it up in areas through this, as if these leaves have got a little ribbing to them. It goes a little cooler, a little bluer. So I'm going to let some cerulean come down here. To go just inside the border there. Let that trickle down. It gets actually very warm here. Let's come off there. This is, unlike the oil painting, remember this is the reverse. We paint out our negative shapes. We're painting out the dark areas of this to leave the light areas behind. I've done some very darks down here in a minute, some really lovely darks. That colour there. Lily stem that comes down there. There's one that comes under here as well a little bit. Now let's start to make some darks. We'll take our ultramarine to start with, and the burnt sienna as usual, and then we'll move on to the it's really nice warm. We'll move on to the Prussian blue in a minute, but there's some really lovely darks going on down, warm darks going on down here. I want them wet into wet, so I've got to work fairly quickly before this paint dries any further. So working on the vertical, which is not ideal for this sort of work, but you still get some wonderful effects. And now we can finish off with this Prussian I was talking about. Prussian and a bit of the burnt sienna to really get some final darks and warms in there. Now, this petal we're talking about, this edge here I didn't actually finish before, did I? So I better go back to that. About right, okay. So we have the edge of the petal here, coming round there. All the way around. I think we'll use some of that glaze here as well A little darker yet, just to link that colour with it a bit more. And there we are, our piece finished. That's the end of these films, and I hope you've gained so much from them, and lots of new and exciting ways to paint and explore and enjoy yourself. Okay, moving on from that last painting, we're going to paint a little woodland scene with a country road going through it here in France. And it's in autumn with some early snows, as you can see. So we've got some little white areas that we want to put into here. And we're going to paint this one with watercolour and then the use of sponging and texture. And we shall use not only watercolour but some opaque paint as well, and sponge the opaque paint over the top and the watercolour over the top to give us all these textures with an ordinary sea sponge, which gives us lovely textures. Before we do that, I want to put some masking fluid on. This one's called Pebeo, and it's a lovely gum because it's actually a slightly light blue in colour, which means we can see it on the paper. Some of the masking fluids, which are basically liquid latex, you can't see them because they're white afterwards, so it's a bit of a nuisance. But this one is a light blue colour, so we can actually see it. And I'm going to apply it with a clay shaper. That's a little tool which we use for modelling clay with. Got a rubber tip to it, so it's easy to clean. You can use a brush, but it tends to clog the brushes up, whereas these things just rub off very easily afterwards. You can get them in all different sorts of points, as you can see here. So what I need to do is take my clay shaper and paint this where these little bits of white snow are going to be, and it will dry, and when I paint it will resist the paint. So at the end of the painting I can take it off and I'll be left with these white areas. If you just rub off, I'll be left with these. I can tint in later if I want to. Now the only thing to watch out with this stuff is that if you leave it in the sun, in sunlight, it can actually soak into the paper and be quite hard to get off. So don't let it remain out in very hot weather. If you're painting out in very hot weather, keep it in the shade whilst you're working on it. So what I'm going to do then is work all these little textures of white up here. Dabble, dabble, dabble with the stuff, and when it's dry we'll start our painting. But it must be absolutely dry. Don't attempt to start it if the masking fluid is still wet at all. Well then, that's enough masking fluid for that. Just do the job nicely. We'll let that dry off before we put the painting up and start actually working on it. Masking fluid is about dry, but first of all we need to see what materials we're going to need to paint with. Down here beside me you can see that I have my little pellets of watercolour again, and I'm only going to need to use 3 brushes on this. I think I've got my oval mop for doing the wet in wet. I've got a rigger brush here. The rigger brushes are quite important. So it's got a long thin blade. It'll hold a fair amount of liquid, and it will mean that I can paint these long thin branches and twigs. Originally they were used for painting the paint. They'd paint the line of rigging, and the paint would close behind it slightly and make it even thinner and finer. And then an ordinary little round to do the heavier branches. Most important of all for this particular painting, some pieces of the sea sponge I was talking about. And look at the lovely texturing on that you can see. This is ideal for stippling, making the paint on here and stippling these textures of the leaves on that we're going to get later on. Apart from that, all I need is a jug of water and we're away. This is going to be a wet in wet technique, but at first I'm going to paint wet next to wet, so the two will blend into each other, and then we'll work into those afterwards. Now remember, with this painting in watercolour, we paint the light colours first. So I paint all my palest colours first, and we gradually add the others into that. So I'm going to start with my very pale, very delicate aureolin yellows first of all. leaving white paper in between. You can see it's going to trickle a bit, but I'm not too worried about that because you know me, I paint very loosely and freely. I like to enjoy my painting and not be worried about having to make an exact copy of some photograph. I don't want to be doing that, I'm just going to enjoy what I'm doing. So over here, a bit stronger there. Lovely autumn colours we're going to be doing with the sunlight just coming through this misty, frosty morning here. We've already got our masking fluid on us, as you see, it's all nice and dry now. Going to right up to the edges on this as well. That's where my painting is within this rectangle here. Now I'm going to come back to my cobalt violet, which is a lovely light violet for the distance here. And just let that blend in through there. We know I don't have to worry about the whites because not only have I already got the whites in with the masking fluid, but I can always put a bit of white in later with gouache, which is something we've got to explore later, is how to put opaque paints over the transparent. And all of these colours at the moment, of course, are transparent. I'm going to paint this right the way through here, and I'm going to bring some light blues into it in a moment. I'm painting my most transparent and lightest colours first. And I'm painting this wet into wet technique by using wet next to wet at first, letting it blend into each other. Don't want too much water on it because otherwise it's going to go everywhere, especially as I'm painting vertically for you. But just enough that these colours will blend one into another and give me these effects of light that I want. These oval mops are very useful because you've got so much control to, as you can see, you can use the tip to get fine lines and you can use the flat of the brush to do your broader painting. So I'll come back to my cerulean blue now. We'll look at the distance here. And let it run one thing into another. Soft effects of light. Whole of that tree coming through there is that grey blue. This is the beautiful delicacy of watercolour. We'll start to go on to some of our oranges in the background here. I'm going to take a little chrome yellow now. I'll start to just add some of these into the greens. And go back up into these trees here and a little bit more. Let's take some of our light red now, and we'll just let that drop into these colours here. So we've painted our snow scenes, we've painted bright summer beaches, and we've done our oils and our nice woodland scenes in summer. Now we're looking at a little bit of autumn. Right? Come back here now with the cobalt, and we need to add in some of these cools coming down this tree. We're going to need this cobalt elsewhere as well, so. And in a moment we'll have to leave it to dry more because otherwise it's just going to come one blob of wet into wet, and we need it to dry off so that I can come in with a bit more harder detail, which will then make all this disappear into the background. Let some of these darks spread out amongst the trees just down in here. Certainly coming down here, where we need some dark and warm still yet, but just indicate with these first. Burnt sienna now, and the Prussian blue, which really brings us to our darkest. I'm going to want some of that going on here with this ivy. But I don't want hard edges up here, so this is why I'm putting them in now, so that it has a chance to blend a bit more. can see how we can use the tip of the brush always to give us more texture. While I've got the colour on my brush, we'll look at where else it might be as well. And there we go for the moment, let that dry. Well, the painting's dry now, so we can start to remove the masking fluid. Yes, no problem there. Use a cloth to help me. I find it comes away more easily than with my fingers. So do make sure that the painting is dry first, otherwise you're going to have a right slushy mess. So you can see there's quite a lot of white paper there again, isn't there? So what we do now is to come back to our painting, and this time we come in, before we do the final work with the sponges, we're going to come back with the two round brushes, my medium round and my rigger, to paint all these distant trees and branches in, the darker trees and branches. And for that we're going to use the ultramarine again, good old ultramarine, and some burnt sienna. You can start to paint in these, around these leaves and ivy here, and the warmer colours there. I'm not going to use the sponge for this one because there are actually quite large dark areas there that I want to pick up. And I'm going to make quite a strong green there as well, because we need to bring things forward a bit there, and I'd like to have a bit more colour amongst this ivy, like that, and you see the difference that that's making. It is now bringing that forward. I know it's fairly opaque, but this is a very dark area here anyway in this ivy, and I really do want to have some stronger greens. Come back to these blue greys. Let's come back down to here, and we're going to use some cobalt and sienna. And you see now when we paint we get a harder edge because the paint is dry. We're painting wet onto dry. And now let's see, those trees come up here. Those are the lighter coloured ones back there. Or two stronger tree trunks coming up and through, not many. And we've done these lighter coloured background tree trunks. We'll get stronger with our colours still, and we'll get stronger and stronger and stronger until we have our desired effect. As the light catches them, we'll just indicate this tree. You don't have to paint cross every T and dot every I. We're just indicating and giving an impression of, and I'm going to use a little bit of ultramarine as well for this, just to give a bit more blue to it, a bit more cool to it. This is before we use the sponge, so we could have even more texture once we start using the sponge. Some clean water, blend it back a bit. Right, so here we go then. We're ready to start on our sponging and leaf work. What colour am I going to use first? Well, I'm going to use quite a strong yellow to make some of my chrome yellow, which is fairly opaque and be quite a good one to use on this. So light colours first. Take my sponge and we'll see what happens. Yeah, there we go. You can see already the texturing we're getting there. at the moment we're using Viridian and some chrome yellow to give us a really nice green. Then we're going to go darker in our greens as we go along. And we're sponging it with a nice sea sponge. Look at the texture on that, isn't that gorgeous? And so we need to go to our more orangey reds now. Let's see if we can get some of those on there. There we go. So we're using now the chrome yellow and some bright red. It certainly does give me a very nice orangey yellow. We shall come to the bright red in a moment and really make some lovely colours, but look how this is starting to glow. Just building it up gradually, just these cascades of autumn leaves, lovely colours of the French autumn forests here. And of course those colours are dropping down beside the road here as well, so we have to put some of those in down here. And we'll finish up with the light red, almost the Indian red. Much more orange now. Deep purple and some ultramarine. Try this purple in a moment. Before I do try the purple, I'm going to use a little bit of alizarin crimson, because I can still see some warmer areas in these trees here that are a little bit redder than the colour I mixed just now. There we go. Now I'm going to come down to those cooler. Purple and the Prussian, which will give me a lovely rich deep bluey purple. Now carefully, because we don't want to overdo that, some of the dark leaves showing through from behind, especially here. And here, coming onto the road even a little. There we go, and finally back. My last darker strokes, I'm going to make up that same Prussian blue and purple, which really are a couple of the darkest colours I could possibly use, just to hit one or two of these very dark branches coming down through here, which are going to become a bit lost as I've done all this texturing. And just pull some of these out again. I would say that's a finished painting. I don't do much more with that. Put a little signature down the bottom, as usual. And voila, walk down that road, shall we? Well, this series of butterflies is going to require that I mask off some of the areas to show you the way we're going to use masking fluid, and hard and soft edges, wet into wet around the outside and a harder edge here. The masking fluid again that I'm using is the Pebeo, and I've got two clay shapers here which are very useful with rubber tips. One is a wedge shaped one, one is a pointed one, which is I think better than using a brush a lot of the time because the brushes get clogged up, whereas these can just be rubbed off very easily. In this particular case I need to make this a very sharp edge for the butterfly, a white sharp edge, so I want to very carefully put some masking fluid all the way around there, so that later on when I've done the wet into wet edging I can just tint that down, but it will look like it's been painted with a very sharp edge. I could do this by painting the wet up against the dry, but as I want to put a lot of wet into wet around the outside, it's going to be better for me to use a masking fluid here in this case. So I'm just using the clay shaper to paint in this masking fluid all the way around the outside of the wing, the border line here, where I'm going to be able to rub it away later. On the edge of this plant here there's some lighter little dots and light areas too that I just want to pick up on. We're going to start the underpainting of this blue butterfly now, which I want to do a little bit of mixed media with, because I'd like to have the depth of colour under here for the blue, and then go over the surface with a very fine texturing of pastel, the Unison Soft Pastel, which I think will give the iridescence of this butterfly quite well. And then the background will be wet into wet. So first of all, let's put on a coat here, a nice even coat of a darker colour for the pastel to go over later. I haven't stretched this paper, I've only held it down with masking tape, and it's £140 Arches hot press, because I want a smooth or relatively smooth surface for this one, just to scumble the pastel over later. I'm going to just put a little bit of water over the whole surface first, so that whatever colour I put in will blend evenly across it. And in this case I want to start with a cobalt violet, which is going to glow through all over it. You can see I've already got the masking fluid on the edges, so it's not going to go beyond those edges anyway. And these are the colours that I'm actually seeing on the photograph of the blue butterfly here, this sort of mauve colour underneath here, this very light violet mauve. And then I'm going to drop in a few more colours just into that to glow through as well. There we go. It's got a nice even coat of that across the whole of the wings. So we don't want blobs, and we don't want, so hopefully those will blend out as we go along. And it gets a little bit darker, so I'm going to take some light red and just drop that in there as well, because I notice that there's a slightly darker tint underneath this blue, but I want to say glow under there. I let that go wet into wet across the surface, and it comes down here, down here, and in fact this bit here is slightly more yellow ochre, so I'm going to just take a little bit of, in this case, some raw sienna, not the yellow ochre, and drop that in so that glows through down here. The lovely effects we can get with the wet into wet. It comes down through there a bit as well, and through some of the areas of the wing. And then there's a little bit of deep blue going on in places, so I'm just going to drop in some of the ultramarine into these areas and edges, which will shimmer through the lighter blue pastel I'm going to use later. That happens down here as well, right down through the body. It's quite dark down there actually. I'll drop a bit more dark into there in a minute. So this deeper ultramarine blue that's coming down into here, which I'm going to pick out with the pastel, scumble over with the pastel afterwards. It's a light blue will come up later. Get the feeling of the veins coming down as well by just dragging this down and through now. Just let it blend. See how effective this can be. We dug these edges getting hard. I think it's drying out a bit now, so I've got to be careful because I must finish quite quickly now, otherwise it's going to dry out too much. And I won't be able to get the effects I need. I'll just let these colours blend in here. That's just about done the underpainting of that. Maybe a bit stronger in places on that blue, just a little bit. Just blend it in softly. And then there's some much darker on the body, so we'll take some indigo, a little touch of burnt sienna, and just drop that in on the body here for the darker areas, which we'll go over later, as I say, with the very light blue pastel I'm going to use, turquoise pastel. And these very fine details on the wings I'll put in later. It's just to get this iridescence that we want. Just tickling it in, letting the wet into wet do the work after that. And finally, the dry brush will just blend any little areas that don't quite look soft enough. And there we go. Now we let that dry off, and then we can come back in with the background here with the wet into wets. Now we're going to paint the wet into wet background with this, and I'm going to use an oval mop, and first of all soak all of the paper except for the butterfly, of course, and then drop in my lightest colours first and finish with my darkest and strongest. Now the thing with this is not easy to see where you've been. Fortunately on this particular painting, except on the butterfly itself, I've got masking fluid just around the edge of the butterfly's wing, so it makes it a bit easier. But I'm going to have to look along the paper, and the light's very dull today, to be able to see where the water hasn't touched, see any shiny areas like I'm just doing there now. Water hasn't quite got to. There we go, and now that makes the whole paper surface wet, which is very important, because if you're dropping wet into wet, it has to flow. You don't want any hard-edged dry areas. That's what we're going to be doing later. So that's the later technique, is the wet onto the dry to give hard-edged ones. Now, into that we drop our next lightest colours, which in this case for me are going to be Aureolin yellow, because I want a nice light green coming in later. So I'm going to paint a wash of that virtually over the whole thing where the various greens are here. I want to come back in with some raw sienna now, a slightly warmer yellow. Now I'm going to go down to some burnt sienna, quite different to the raw sienna, the same thing, but it's been cooked, basically, it's been burnt. Now let's go on to the greens. I'll take some cerulean blue and a little chrome yellow, ultramarine, and the chrome yellow, very much darker green, going on around this butterfly's wing. Come right up to the edge there, quite darkly. It will spread into it slightly, so giving the outer focus idea, but not too much. And this is where we're going to get quite dark now, so I'm going to take some Prussian blue and a little touch of burnt sienna to start making my much darker areas in here. I'm going to use pastel over that later. Come round the wing, this dark, and these areas here on this seed head. I still wanted a little greener, so I'm going to add a bit more chrome yellow to that there. Lemon yellow is opaque, so it should just blend in a little bit of burnt sienna and more warms just into these bits where they've been lost with all the blues going on. I've got my set of Unison pastels, and I'm going to use these three blues out of it because I think they're about the closest. We've got the warmth showing through. We'll start with our darker one and just lightly, gently scumble that over the top just to try and get this feeling. This is purely experimental, but it should work. Not something I've seen done before. I'm inventing it myself, so we don't know if it'll work or not. It does seem to be, doesn't it? I'm very tempted now to come in with a brush and wet this down and make it a bit darker, because these pastels are going to show lighter against it, but not enough, I don't think. So what I'm going to do is, as I'm exploring and experimenting, is come back now with the brush and just wet down this paper a bit more and make that a tone darker, in fact. Go straight over all of this lot and give it one quick wash. come back over the pastel in a moment, but I know that these pastels are going to show a lot better against I wasn't quite, because the watercolours always dry a tone lighter, and that's what's happened here as well. Now we let that dry, then we'll work back over with the pastels again. So we're working between watercolour and pastel. You can actually mix the pastel with the water, of course, as well. Right, we've still got some masking fluid here to remove as well, and that bit of seed head, because I haven't quite finished painting that yet. And now this is ready to put more pastel onto. So we'll continue with the pastel first of all, and we'll go back to that seed head, because it can work anyway in any direction we want to. At the moment we're just putting on another mid-blue, just following it through over this, just scumbling it over the surface. This is why I wanted a smooth surface paper, because it'll just take the pastel lightly without too much texture. You can do a little bit of soft blending, but we don't want to lose the brightness of the pastel. If we blend it, we lose that lovely bright quality of the pastel. We don't want that. I think it might be nice to go for slightly deeper blue as well. Let's have a look at our lovely cobalt blue that's in here, and I just want to tickle in a little bit of that lovely cobalt blue that has been lost in the watercolour. Just look at that beautiful blue we can get there, look. Just tickling it in. I don't know what you think, but I think that's quite attractive, and it's not something we could have got as vibrantly just with the watercolour alone. So I'm saying, by all means experiment with mixed media, and don't just do what the books say or teacher says. If you want to explore and experiment, you do it. And I'd say we'd almost finished this painting now. We don't do too much more to it. Give you a few little details here and there. And there's our blue butterfly, iridescently shining out. There we go. One blue butterfly. Now on this particular painting, the butterfly is going to be carefully painted before the background, but I want to mask off these flowers so that they can be painted at the very end. I'm back with my chisel-shaped clay shaper, and we'll paint in all of these yellows. You see we've blocked in a lot of the areas here. It'll all make sense later on. It saves a lot of very careful painting around, and we can be very loose with our wet into wet then to allow the shapes to blend right across this, rather than having a jump from one side to another. Just painted the male blue, which is the bright blue one. Now we're going to have a go at the female, which is, in this case we're doing the underwings, and she's sitting on some ragwort flower, which is rather attractive. So I've already done my masking, as you can see. That's going to come off towards the end. First of all we're going to paint the butterfly, then the wet into wet background, and then we're going to go back into those flowers and finish those off at the end. So we'll just zoom in now on the butterfly itself, because that's where we're going now. We've got to paint the butterfly fairly carefully. I'm actually painting upside down here. I'm going to be using two brushes, one a number 8 brush for this, and then a mop at the end. We'll start off with the slightly larger brush. We're going to just paint very, very carefully, from the lights to the darks again, a darker tint. I've got to leave all these light areas to tint in afterwards. I've just got to paint carefully now. I could put masking fluid into these small areas too, but I'm not going to. Now I can drop into this while it's still dark colour, and it's still a tad of the green coming into it just to bring it down, because it's quite a dull undercolour here. And it's very green into that edge there, so we'll let that come right the way around. It's quite green, so I'm going to take a bit of Viridian and drop that in. It'll be a little bit bright, so I'll drop some of the other colour back in a moment. And a wee tad of purple into little bits of it, just to give the texture that we need here. Coming down to the body, there's a small touch of ultramarine. Through there. And into the eye there. Into these areas, I want to go stronger yet. Use a little touch of purple now with my burnt sienna, and darken up this whole front wing area here. Fairly carefully, we're actually drawing with the brush, so you see I've already drawn out quite a careful drawing, haven't I? And into that we'll add a bit of blue, a bit of ultramarine at the front here again to bring it, darken it down a fraction. right the way through there. Work on this bit here now. There's some quite nice oranges going on. I'm going to take some cadmium orange. Into that I'm going to drop a little bit of rose in a moment. It comes down into other places here too. Rose into the cadmium orange, and it will just drop it in wet into wet again. Just softening it in with the clean water. Let it reach up and blend. They are light, but they're now toned down slightly. Make a colour for these darks. Don't need to go to a smaller brush yet. I'm going to use some Prussian purple because they're quite cool and they're very dark. Just paint those in. Look how lovely and dark they look against that. A bit wet there, be careful it doesn't spread too far. As it dries out now, a little bit more of the detail, the veins and so on, are running through here. Right between here and these. To rest my hand on to make an arch to paint that line all the way down. We're painting wet over dry, which means we do get these hard edges. Little feathered edges, very carefully with the tip of the brush. So I haven't needed to go to my very small brush yet. I may need to drop any colour back into here. We can do that any time we like. And that's our butterfly about there. A little bit of cobalt violet to this wing, with a little bit of cool to soften that in. There we go. We'll let that dry. And we'll come back to our wet into wet. Right, now it's time to go on to the background. We've got the basic butterfly done. We're going to do the flowers afterwards. So first I'm going to wet all of the paper with a big oval mop. I didn't need to use my small brush after all. So all the way around. Be careful you don't go onto the butterfly because you want this liquid to stop before it reaches the butterfly. Then onto that we'll drop our lighter colour straight away and work in wet into wet from very light to much darker as we go along. I've left that area there because I want to be able to wet into wet yellow in the centre there in a minute. So we get an out of focus blurry effect for the background. Drop that in. Our little burnt sienna and the sap green, make a much warmer green. You can give the feeling of leaves and grasses going onto here a bit there. Let's drop in some much deeper, some ultramarine now with some burnt sienna in it to really get some darks going. There we go, don't need much more than that. Got a tad darker but not much. Dry off. Now while that's drying, the centre part of this, we wanted to do a little bit of more yellow into that. So I'm just going to drop in some chrome yellow into there, where there isn't any. Dry my brush out again, and suck some of it away. Some of it's going over the masking fluid anyway. You can see how it leaves me a lighter yellow there. Okay, the paper should be just dry enough now to remove the masking fluid. So I prefer to use a bit of cloth with this. It lifts it a bit easier, it grasps it. Right, that makes it ready for us now to put to our next stage of painting these flowers in. And I'm going to give it all one coat of Oriolian yellow to start. When that's dry, I shall work over the darker yellows afterwards. We can afford to make the effect of the stems by bringing some of that yellow across it anyway. That dry, then we'll work up our petals bit by bit with the stronger yellows. We're going to work on this area, still with our medium brush, and I'm going on to some chrome yellow. Keep it nice and clean. Chrome yellow's a little bit more opaque. And we're going to work a bit more thinly at first into this lighter yellow. Go darker into this yet in a moment, so nice strong vibrant yellow for the poisonous flowers of the ragwort, well, the poisonous leaves of the ragwort, so we get much stronger, darker, sharper edges. These are going to be much darker later as well, but I'll just paint them in at the moment. Paint this being a much more opaque paint. You can paint it on as thickly as you like because it's not going to show as transparent anyway. Chrome yellow. Put a little bit of rose with it, lovely orangey red to drop in here. Nice and warm. And then we've got this one, which is right through here, the same sort of colour. And there are shorter petals coming closer inside, which are probably a little bit warmer. Burnt sienna under here, and just bring in some of the shadows on these petals here. Thin that down a bit. We could do a little bit of glazing over the petals here, just to give a bit more three-dimensional quality just there with those. Coming back to a little bit of cobalt, and come in with some blues in between these petals a bit. And this here actually is quite a strong green, so I'm going to come back to my dark bits in between. Don't let the brush get too dry, keep it fluid, and we're still using watercolour. Now we need to come up and dot the I's and cross the T's, so I'm just going to bring a little bit of purple in, because purple is the opposite in the colour circle, and I reckon I need to use a thin brush now because I've got to do one of the antennae. But if we use that purple now, we should end up with quite a nice dark. And we can go back to the other brush again and just tart up some of these colours a bit. Gives it that nice and seeing, that little bit of vibrance that we didn't have before. Separate those petals out. And we're probably about there, you know. Well, there we are, there's our male blue butterfly. A bit of drawing to do here and there. Just the odd petal shape to bring out. And there we are. I think we can finish at that.